In our first lesson with Sam, who's taking us through the Brecht unit, we started off by going through information from our research. We were comparing things that we'd picked up. We went through a presentation which gave us a lot of information about the context of the historical context of when Brecht was alive and when he was writing his plays, and what sort of effect that adds to what he wrote and why he wrote it. Things about the specific era and the political situation that his country was in at the time, especially during World War II, where he was exiled from his country for his views. We then went on to look at examples of Brechtian technique in modern media and plays and such. So this included things like a scene from Reservoir Dogs where there is a policeman being tortured, which is quite some serious imagery, but to add that sort of dissonance that Brecht used, there is some really happy music in the background, and it's quite jarring really, and it takes away that element of realism. You're watching it and you understand that it's not real, and it's supposed to give the audience time to stop and think about what they're watching instead of getting caught up in the emotions of it. They are removed emotionally from sympathising with the characters on screen, and they have to think about what they're actually watching. Another thing, another clip that we watched was we watched a few clips from The Mighty Boosh, which uses a few elements of Brechtian technique in that it is very, very surreal and episodic in the way that it's set out. It's very obvious that it's not real. You're not. There's no suspension of disbelief at all. That's not what it's for. And Flight of the Conchords, we watched a little bit of that as well, which showed a small clip of where the characters randomly break into song, which again detaches you from thinking that any of it might be realistic. You are aware that it is staged, and it gives you time to think about what you're actually watching instead of getting caught up in all the emotions of watching a dramatic piece. So later we went on to do some warm-up exercises that included we did a mirroring exercise, both physical and vocal. So for the physical mirroring, we had to do basic movements using our arms and legs, and the person mirroring us would stand opposite and try to do the exact same thing. This is supposed to help us with our concentration, because you have to concentrate very intensely to follow the other person's actions. Same with the vocal exercise. We had to stand and talk about something mundane that we'd done over Christmas, just that we could keep talking about, and the person who was mirroring us would have to repeat what you said as quick as they could, until it gets to a point where you're almost saying things at the same time. The vocal one was much more difficult, but it's very important to concentrate as much as you could, and that's where it should be useful later on if we use these sorts of techniques. It helps with your concentration and your observation. You have to observe your partner incredibly well, which you should be using when you go on stage. It helps you be aware of everything that's around you. We did another warm-up where we all walked around the room, and we changed the way we walked on a scale of 1 to 10, starting with things like status. So, for example, if they said status, 1 would be lower class and 10 would be upper class or posh. And we had to change the way we walked around the room to alter to this stereotypical perception of what lower class was or what posh was. So for lower class, everybody sort of, they started moving in less formal movements. Everybody started walking really loosely, slouching a lot, sometimes kicking at the floor. And for posh, everybody sort of stood up really high and put their shoulders back and their heads up, and everybody moved quite rigidly. So that sort of exercise was to help show us what everybody perceives these sorts of stereotypes to be, and how we can represent that through just body language, just using our walks. We did another one using tension. So if we were at number 1, we had to move as loose as possible, and everybody's arms were flailing around, everybody's bodies were completely let go and loose and limp, and everybody was moving quite freely. And when we went higher up and we went back up to 10, that had to be as tense as we could possibly walk, and everything slowed down and almost jarred to a halt by the time we got to 10, because we were all so rigid and so tense, and our muscles were so tight that we were barely moving at all. Everything had slowed down. Moving was very difficult. So that just sort of helps us understand how useful our bodies can be in showing to other people like different amounts of tension and how relaxed you are. And we also looked at an example of a Brechtian play, which was one by Splendid Productions, which is something that we might be using as reference later. We moved on to do some work on freeze frames, and the point of this was to try to... We got put in pairs, and we were given a random emotion, and we were told to create a tableau of that emotion, that represented that emotion stereotypically. So it was all about everything being as big as possible, because that's what Brechtian theatre was like. It wasn't so subtle; it was more really outwardly stereotypical, so that even if there was no sound, you could work out what was being shown to you. So we started off with things that you might assume were quite easy, like love. So a lot of people had one of the pair stood up and the other was on the floor on their knees with their hands out, looking with absolute adoration to show that they were in love. And a few things were a little bit more difficult, like intimidation, where one person would get on the floor and cower away from the person intimidating, and the other person would sort of tower above them with a really powerful stance. And this led us into working on gestus. So to try and develop them into gestus from just simple freeze frames, we tried to add story and plots and context, which was really difficult actually, and we should be doing more work on that later. On the second day, we did a series of warm-ups just to loosen us up, and this was followed by a game that was used by Antonato to sort of exhaust the people he was working with. It was very tiring. Everybody would run round, and the person that was it, if they tagged you, you would have to stand with your arms out and your legs open, and someone who hadn't been tagged had to crawl underneath your legs, and then you were free to run around again. So there was no winner or loser. The game would just go on and on and on, and the whole point of that was to get everybody really, really tired and almost exhausted, because Arto's theory was that once you were so past the absolute point of exhaustion, you enter a sort of trance-like state, and then after that, all the work that you do is really innovative. So that was his theory, and that was why we did that. We did using nursery rhymes into pairs, where we would we had to choose nursery rhyme. We would mime to our partner to see if they could work it out what it was, and the whole point of that was to mime it in such an exaggerated way without using sound that even without any sound they could definitely immediately work out which nursery rhyme we were doing. So this is really useful in Brechtian theatre, because Brecht believed that if there was a glass wall in front of the stage so that you couldn't hear anything that was going on stage, the acting should still be so exaggerated and clear that without any sound you can still understand what's happening and understand the point of it. The next, we were put into different pairs, and we had to create freeze frames again like we did the day before, only to different criteria. So the first one was to do contrasting characters, starting with Romeo and Juliet. So a few people did this differently as well. Some people tried to recreate the balcony scene. Me and my partner, we had I was on the floor, dead, being Juliet, and my partner was Romeo, who had just discovered me dead on the floor. So that was quite clear. Our next one was we had to be cat and mouse, so this had to be really exaggerated, and we set ourselves up as though we were chasing one another. The mouse was very exaggeratedly scared, and the cat was quite playful. Another one we did was rich and poor. So we had the rich person stood up as tall as possible with his head high in the air, looking quite snobbish, while the poor person was on the floor, curled up with his hands held out as if he was begging, because that's a really sort of stereotypical image, and that might people might immediately recognise that. Another one we did was student and teacher. So the teacher was stood up straight, looking quite smart, and the student was shorter and on the floor, looking up to the teacher as if he admired them. So that's how we represented that. Later then we had to do the same freeze frames again and deliver a line in third person as the character that we were. So for example, if I was the cat, my line would be something like, "The cat just wants to play," saying it in third person instead of saying, "I just want to play." And this was something that Brecht did a lot in his theatre. He thought that this would make it a lot more clear about characters' motivations and things like that. It's similar to how he would put up little play cards at the side of a stage, or little signs with words on them that would vaguely explain what was going on. It's something else that adds to the alienation effect, because it's really unrealistic and wouldn't happen in real life. Nobody talks in third person. So that helps to distance the audience from emotionally connecting with the characters, which is what Brecht wanted. So that was interesting. After that, we got split up again into boys and girls, and we had to make entrances on the stage as a stereotypical sort of character. So the first thing we had to do was enter on stage as if we were a prostitute. This was really difficult at first because we were supposed to be playing up to stereotypes of the characters we were playing. I think a lot of people just weren't sure what a stereotype of a prostitute should be. But after having a little bit of time to think and just relax and let go, everybody had a good go at it and came on stage with a sort of like brash confidence and doing sort of stereotypical sexy things like flashing a bit of leg or like taking a bit of your cardigan down and things like that, and then standing really confidently in the middle of the stage. And we had to do the same thing with delivering lines in third person before we moved on to entering the stage as a different sort of character, something completely contrasting, which was a soldier. So a lot of people found this a lot easier because everybody knows what the stereotype of soldier should be. So we all people tried different ways, but mostly marched down the stairs in a very rigid way, and when they entered the stage, kept marching. To try and make it a little bit clearer, I marched only in straight lines, turning at 90-degree angles like a soldier does when he's sort of parading around, and stood to attention, saluted, and then stood at ease. So hopefully that was recognisable as a soldier without any words. Next, we did freeze frames as an entire class, which was a lot more difficult than just doing it with one or two people because there was 15 to 20 of us trying to create this freeze frame, and we weren't allowed to talk about it. We were given a term, a phrase or a word that we had to make a freeze frame of, and it had to be so obviously visually recognisable as the word that we've been given, but we weren't allowed to actually communicate with each other, so this was really difficult, some more than others. We started off with world peace, and everybody sort of held hands in a circle. Some people held hands in a circle running around, and some people held up the stereotypical peace symbol like that. There were a few people who went to the middle of the circle and put their arms up to represent a fire, as if everybody was around a campfire. Some people were sat cross-legged meditating, and I was stood playing the guitar and singing, so I hope that was recognisable as world peace. It was quite difficult. It's quite a broad term that's quite difficult to personify, but we did our best. And next we tackled a very rich area, so everybody again was stood up looking stereotypically posh, very straight rigid backs, doing a lot of different things. I was holding a lady's hand, and when asked later what we were doing, so that we weren't just doing something random, we actually knew specifically what we were aiming for. I was courting a lady. That was my idea of like a rich man living in a rich area sort of thing. We moved on to poor areas, so everybody got down on the floor or a lot lower because the levels sort of represent class. So we were supposed to be starving, so I was holding my stomach and I was curled up on the floor, as a lot of us were. And another one we did was we had to show that there was an oncoming storm from one side. So I was holding an umbrella against the storm while trying to run away, and other people were also trying to run away and things like that. Another one we did was we had to pretend a tidal wave was coming from the other side, which was quite funny because a lot of people were running away, but there were a few people that were more creative about it. For example, someone pretended to pretended to be sort of riding the wave. Someone pretended to be surfing on the wave, which was quite cool. That actually made it more obvious what was happening. So I hope that made it clear what we were trying to represent. So this just sort of taught us how carefully you have to think about the actions that you're doing. Everything should be as obvious as possible so that the audience could understand what was happening even if they weren't listening. Finally, we did a activity with newspaper articles. We were put into small groups of 3 for a few minutes, and we had to organise 3 freeze frames to show a headline that we'd been given of these newspaper articles. Ours was something along the lines of about a Russian suicide bomber at the train station. So we started off with the first freeze frame being the beginning, which was 2 people were being travelling people at the train station, holding bags and such and looking like they were in a hurry, and there was one person in the centre who was trying to look very shifty because they were supposed to be the bomber, and they were looking as if they were hiding something. Then the second one was the explosion, which we created using our own bodies. Everybody stopped being people, and we had one person stood with their arms up in the middle, and 2 people stood with their arms out, opposite on either side. So it was symmetrical, and pushing outwards as if there was some sort of force pushing outwards like an explosion. And the third freeze frame was the aftermath. So we had one person was stood trying to help the other people, and there were 2 people on the floor who were severely injured, so they had lost limbs and things like that. It seemed that was quite clear what we had done, because after about the second guess or so, the audience understood what it was, and somebody said that it was a suicide bomb. So we were quite happy that we'd managed to do that. But the whole point of this was to sort of reinforce that everything has to be as obvious as possible. You really need to be absolutely sure what you're trying to represent and show it in as clear a way as possible. So those are the examples of Brechtian technique that we've been covering, and hopefully we should be hopefully I'll be able to put those into my work later on as well.